on behalf of the Indian Futures and the India Habitat Center, I welcome you all today. So may I now request and in fact invite, starting with Ambassador Lakshmi Puri, who is, I'm sure you all know, is now also a novelist, and her book, her novel Swallowing the Sun, is already hitting all international shores, and she has been a former UN Assistant Secretary General. Thank you, ma'am. It's an honor to have you with us today evening. And ambassador to Hungary also. We also have with us Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, who is, as you all know, is in fact the host for at the India Habitat Center as the president of the India Habitat Center, and she has had an extremely illustrious career as a diplomat, serving very important assignments, and she has written two wonderful books, not two, I mean three, yeah, four books, and at least two of them, yes, absolutely, have been, part of our courses. In fact, Professor Mattoo would also know that her books are being taught in JNU. So great, ma'am, thank you so much. So she's going to chair today's session. We have with us Professor Amitabh Mattoo, who is the Dean of the School of International Studies and has been a Vice Chancellor, the youngest Vice Chancellor in India.
And the best looking.
And the best looking, yes. You can say that. So great, sir. Great to have you, sir, with us today evening. We also have with us equally young-looking Ambassador Mohan Kumar, who has been India's ambassador to France and is now the Dean of Strategic Initiatives of O.P. Jindal Global University. Absolutely, I started with that, youngest looking diplomat. So great, sir. It's always great to have all of you today. And in fact, I can say it, and I always say that very publicly, that all three of you have been mentors to me and have been extremely inspiring. So it's great, and it's truly an honor to have such illustrious panel with us today. And I'm sure you all know that why we have gathered today. It's a panel discussion on Quad at 20, looking back, looking ahead. Before I hand over to Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee for her chairperson's remarks, I just want to flag two small things, and in a very quick way, that the story of Quad, in fact, it's been a story of international hope, of international ambition, despite pressures to surrender at repeated intervals. And these pressures have been in all four countries, internally and also at a larger level externally. So I think that is what you also need to keep in mind. For India, I think it's an extremely important sort of way at looking at Quad. It's really splendidly brings India, in fact, to the global high table. I think that's a fantastic part about Quad, as I see it, and all credit to Prime Minister Narendra Modi for really understanding the geopolitical, the geoeconomic, the global public goods calculus of the Quad. And this has been a grand, I think, geopolitical opportunity for India. And I think, again, Prime Minister, if you look at the earlier Prime Ministers, there were hesitations of history, and I think really Prime Minister Modi has really taken this, that this is really the India moment, our time has come, and I think Quad and India's participation in Quad is really a reflection of that in many ways. So let me stop here, and I now invite Ambassador Mukherjee to present her chairperson's remarks.
Thank you very much, Manish. I should begin by saying that if Professor Mattoo is the best looking professor in JNU, he is the youngest looking, right? So we've got a really illustrious panel here, and the hall is filling up, and I'm giving notice in advance that for Q&A I will first ask at least two ladies to ask questions before we move to males.
Ask everybody to move forward.
Yeah, please move forward, and also switch off your mobile phones so that there's no problem. So today's topic, which was selected by Manish, on Quad at 20, looking back now, it seems to have been as if he has some astrological powers, because I think it's a very appropriate moment to discuss Quad at 20 because of the fact that never has the global order seemed more uncertain. Never has there been such obvious threats to international peace and security, to the UN Charter. The UN is virtually non-functional, because the Security Council reflects the power points that emerged post post World War II, and it is impossible to expand it because all the P5 have veto powers and they use it to veto whichever country they don't want. So under those circumstances, Quad, like G20, represents the new power structures, those that actually matter, and those that have, in the case of Quad particularly, have the potential, the great potential, to stand up to regional bullies that have become international bullies, and who also threaten the entire security system that we know since World War II. Our distinguished panelists will be picking on different topics as we go through, but I just wanted to say that Quad, when it was established, it was handicapped by a certain lack of enthusiasm as far as आप यहाँ बैठ जाइए, a certain lack of enthusiasm on the part of also of India, because India, since independence, first was part of the non-aligned movement. It still is in a way, but to a much reduced degree, and also was very wary of being drawn into different camps, which India perceived to be inimical to its core national interests. Which is why during the Cold War we steered a very careful path. And then when the Cold War was over and the multipolarity became the buzzword of the day, there again we found that to be a pole, as I've written about it in my book on the EU, the definition of a pole differs from which side of the planet you come from. For India, a pole means having strategic autonomy and strategic space. For the French, for instance, being a pole means allied to the EU and exhibiting a certain amount of anti-Americanism, which comes naturally to the French DNA. I think that each French person, when he's born, is born with anti-Americanism in their DNA. It's quite amazing, actually. So I spent a lot of years there. There again, it was difficult for us to explain to our EU, but particularly our French friends, that we didn't see a multipolar world necessarily as being a pole to challenge US. We saw the multipolar world as a pole where emerging countries have a role to play, a legitimate role to play in maintaining peace and security. To come back to Quad, what changed our perspective on Quad, our panelists will explain. But there is no doubt that today India is one of the most important partner countries of Quad. And Quad was followed by AUKUS, which many say is the military arm. Quad does not have United Kingdom. You have to ask yourself the question, was that deliberate or not? Quad doesn't have France. Quad has the countries that matter for maintaining peace and security in the Indo-Pacific, which today is very vital, particularly for India, where we are finding that unfortunately in our own neighborhood, which was never an easy neighborhood to begin with, we are having more and more challenges on a daily basis. We thought we had surmounted the problems we had with Maldives, but now we have a very real threat emanating on our eastern border in Bangladesh. It's a long border. It's a border which we thought we had secured, and we used to congratulate ourselves before this coup orchestrated by the American deep state happened. And the developments in Bangladesh are a threat not just to West Bengal, not just to Assam, not just to the Northeast, not just to the Chicken's Neck. If you look at it, it is a visceral threat to the territorial integrity of India and the values that India stands for. Never ever have we been in such a situation, which is in a way worse than 1971, because in 1971 we knew that we would ultimately go and carve out Bangladesh and allow the East Pakistanis to live in a secular state where all minorities are accepted. That unfortunately is no longer the case. We also have a rising China, and the need to ensure peace and tranquility in the Indo-Pacific also means that we need to ensure that they don't annex Taiwan. And definitely, in the context in which I'm talking, the fact that we have made some progress in securing little parts of our border with China is very welcome, because after a very long time, we have shifted our focus from the Sino-Indian border and India-Pakistan border, where the ceasefire is holding, to Bangladesh, where there are 1.5 crore Hindus alone whose lives are threatened, and there is no way in which we can allow in 1.5 crore Hindus along with, let's say, 50 lakh jihadis who will then seamlessly merge into India and in Bengal, because most of you who are not from Bengal don't know that the way a Bangladeshi from East Bengal speaks Bengali is fundamentally different from a Bengali from West Bengal. I can follow it in 1 second because that's the language my parents spoke. They come from Dhaka, Bikrampur. But otherwise, they can just merge seamlessly in the rest of India, where people like me are not around to say, hey, that's a Bangladeshi. Yeah? That's not a Bengali from West Bengal. That only a Bengali will be able to tell you. And that too a Bengali whose origin is from East Bengal. I'd like to conclude by saying that sometimes, as has been written both in Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita, we need to prepare for war to ensure peace. And in that, when I looked at the Bhagavad Gita, as I always do for inspiration, I saw that in chapter 2, 38, 39, the Bhagavad Gita says, prepare for war with peace in thy soul, for in that peace there is no sin. In other words, prepare for war if it is inflicted upon you, then go out and defend your territory and your people with full force, and there is no sin, because it is not we who have sought the war is being thrust upon us. With that, I'd like to give the floor to my very distinguished senior colleague from the Indian Foreign Service, Ambassador Lakshmi Puri. She is an expert on so many things that I will not even begin to list them for you. But the achievement that I'm most proud of, apart from her book writing abilities, the beautiful book she's written, is that she was ASG for women in the UN, and she understands more than anyone else here the fate of women and the fact how women are used as weapons of war. So over to Lakshmi, but this time she's not going to speak to you about women, but about Quad at 20. Ambassador Lakshmi Puri, thank you.
Thank you, Bhaswati, and thank you, Manish, for organizing this brainstorming around a very precious and important foreign policy, security policy achievement of India in the last, I would say, 6 years or so. And Bhaswati, thank you for setting the context that where are we at this time, and why are we talking about looking back and looking ahead? Not only because the Quad has turned 20. Of course, 20 is an age when you do want to look back and look ahead, but also because this is a time of, apart from the turmoil in the world, apart from the threats that have arisen, almost existential, including nuclear Armageddon and all of that. Apart from all of that, this is a time of tremendous change and transition in two of the partner countries, the US and in Japan. And the architects of, certainly in Japan, the architect of this was Abe-san, the former Japanese Prime Minister, who spoke about the confluence of the two oceans. And also in the US, whilst President Trump, in his first incarnation, was in fact, as E.M. Jaishankar has pointed out, he really gave it that upgradation and priority. There may be certain aspects of this that may need, somebody has spoken of Trump proofing, but that may need change proofing, systemic change proofing. So that is something that we will need to look at. But let me now go back and see what have we achieved, where are we. In terms of one area Manish wanted me to focus on, which is the global public goods aspect of this relationship. But I will also then touch on how they relate to the other side. So first, the context in which the Quad got upgraded to the summit level and expanded in scope put a spotlight first and foremost on the strategic security significance of US, Australia, and Japan coming together with India as a partner. Because the three were in any case in alliance with the US. The novelty and the value added was both for India and for them was that India was part of this. So that's what the Quad is. And then what is it? It is a part of what US calls a US-led security lattice work in the Asia-Pacific region. And it is a redefined, re-Christianed maritime construct, geopolitical maritime construct that we are talking of. Remember, it was called the Asia-Pacific before. And for 6 years, I was Joint Secretary, Economic Division and Multilateral Economic Relations. And I tried very hard on behalf of the government of India to say that we want to join the APEC. Apart from other issues of how we don't qualify because we were not liberal enough in terms of our economy, Mohan is smiling. We were told, you are not on the geographical footprint of the Pacific. Although we used to argue that our Andamans and Nicobar Islands are in the Pacific and they touch the Pacific and there is this confluence. But this is therefore it's a very significant strategic reconceptualization, which also we need to preserve. And I was looking up how it all happened and the pivot to Asia by the US and how then Hillary Clinton chose to call it Indo-Pacific and all of that. So this is an important issue. And then while Japan and Australia were already part of the geopolitical construct as allies, so I have already said that. Now, on the security side, and I know that Professor Amitabh Mattoo is going to speak to it, but I just want to make the issue of balance, why GPG is being dealt with in this grouping is important, because it is meant to implicitly balance or contain China in its maritime behavior and secure the sea lanes for trade and international shipping lines of communication, ISLOC. And hence it was, we all know, called the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, aimed at promoting a free, open, rule-based, inclusive, resilient, all these qualifiers, Indo-Pacific upholding sovereignty, territorial integrity, international law, where China would not get away with coercively, arbitrarily, and unilaterally setting the terms of engagement and pose challenges to peace, security, stability, and prosperity of the region. So, that is why with that kind of security side of the balancing, you also needed to balance the overemphasis on security in this partnership with the Good Samaritan part of it. To talk about it as a force for good. And here I would like to quote the Quad countries themselves. We countries of the Quad will together act as a global force for good, which they have always emphasized. Sometimes it's been emphasized in US-India context, if you remember, during Biden and Prime Minister Modi's visits, etc. And now the mandate on the GPGs has grown organically over the last few years, and one that would position the Quad on another strategic fitness front. You know, I was very amused to delve into this concept of strategic fitness, not only in a corporate context, but also a country's foreign and security policy context. So, and I also did not realize until, Manish's colleague, student, Subhranshu, served me up with this huge list of all that has been done in this area, to see how much we have matured and deepened our Quad partnership in the GPG area. And it is also an element of balance. I want to emphasize this vis-a-vis China, because China has been obstreperous in the region, economically, in terms of also looking to be a good Samaritan. But with their transactional BRI, debt diplomacy, trade deficit propagating globalization, cooperation policies of China. So that also needed to be balanced with the three regional groupings that are in this Indo-Pacific, sub-regional groupings. I mean, broadly speaking, I would say South Asia, and South Asia, you've referred to the recent blow that has been suffered, but also then ASEAN and the Pacific Island countries. So these are some of the countries that need to be supported through this. Then also this gives, this aspect of the Quad partnership gives it enables the Quad to don the mantle of strategic ambiguity, non-threatening, framed as benign, beneficial, stabilizing force in the turbulent waters of the Indo-Pacific. And balancing strength perception with cooperation, and shedding provocative stances while deterring coercion, and soft power to counterpart hard power that the security cooperation represents. All those military exercises, intelligence sharing, all of that. So then we come to what has been done in terms of programs, etc. So Quad has, in a short time, become a convener, formulator of policies, executor of collaborative programs, and deliverer of some GPGs that the region needs, and through various modalities. And this is another discovery for me as I went through, because we are using various modalities to pursue this cooperation. And they all advance, they are aligned to the UN GPGs, and they principally to advance the achievement of SDGs, climate action, humanitarian response, technological empowerment, connectivity, and resilience, benefiting all in the region and the world. So as the External Affairs Minister put it, the immediate region and beyond value an emerging first responder and contributor to global good, and the emergence of the Indo-Pacific and the maturing of the Quad is noteworthy for promoting global good. So, then there is the democracy merit of this grouping. And that element also is part of the global public good that the Quad represents in the region. And Prime Minister Modi has said, the world is surrounded by tension and conflict, essential for Quad to unite around shared democratic values for the greater good of humanity. And then he emphasizes not against anyone, not antagonistic, but constructive, benefiting broader Indo-Pacific region. Strong support for human rights, international human rights law, democracy, and good governance. In fact, we should use Quad and its democratic platform also in the context of Bangladesh. And then there is the working group on countering disinformation, FIMI, the Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference in Democracies group. So there is that other element, the other counterpart of the democracy merit. Then the moral argument, it helped provide the soft security and sustainability, moral argument and stature to what may now have been viewed as a competitive military security formation. And it assuages the concerns of existing groupings like ASEAN, who are used to being the center of the Asia-Pacific universe. So, and they in fact feel now reinforced that they are going to be part of this, they are going to benefit it will help their bargaining power vis-a-vis China. Then in the last few years, these GPGs have been prioritized, conceptualized, customized, regionally tailored, and actioned on an unprecedented scale and scope in following key areas. It started in the Trump years, but it was deepened in the Biden years. So I know it's a long list, so I'm going to just go over it very quickly, highlighting some of this, but I'll be happy to distribute later on what are the key points. Coalition, so first is infrastructure, and there is the coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure, joint principles for DPI, ports of the future partnership, infrastructure fellows. You'll get an idea of the modalities from this. Infrastructure fellows, 1,200 already. Undersea cables and connectivity and resilience. This is really important. And it makes sense in this partnership. In fact, it's core. And Australia has launched a cable connectivity and resilience center. Japan is providing training. US is providing training. And PIC cable connectivity by 2025. 140 million in investments in undersea cables. So, these were the discoveries that really are heartening. But equally, we have to be careful that they should be safeguarded going forward. Health partnership, pandemic and disease prevention. There's a Quad health security partnership. On this, there's cancer moonshot, Quad vaccine partnership, SOPs for pandemic response, 1 million vaccines, training public health specialists, investment by Australia and US, 84 million, and in 14 countries, infectious disease threats to deal with. So, critical emerging technologies, forefront of innovation. I'll just go through open radio access network, RAN, and 5G. Then on artificial intelligence, Engage. There is this AI Engage partnership for deepening leading edge collaborative research to harness all AI, robotics, and remote sensing. Then safe, secure, trustworthy AI systems. Now, this is a very important part where India wants to be a part of AI governance that is evolving. So, with these 4 countries, it's very important to be there. Biotech, semiconductors, R&D collaboration principles, cybersecurity, resilient supply chain, climate change, supply chain, then the issue of clean energy transitions, climate, resilience initiatives, maritime cooperation, particularly raise maritime domain awareness, including dark vessel maritime domain awareness programs to safeguard their maritime areas, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. That's HADR is a very important part. And then there is this thematic choice of DPGs is based on the felt needs of the region and the vulnerabilities that exist and perceived gaps and weaknesses, and a shared strategic vision in areas where the 4 countries of Quad are capable of contributing, each according to their comparative advantage and strengths. Variable geometry. I always like that word in these guys because I have dealt with so many minilaterals in my professional life that we always like to talk of variable geometry in these kind of things, whether it can be 1, 2, 3, or all 4 countries coming together and contributing. And as you have already seen what the modalities are. As baton holders, separate and collaborative actions, lead countries, and all of that. Now, there are some institutional things that have happened. One is the engagement at summit level, of course, foreign ministers, and now I think the first commerce ministers meetings are going to take place. And there is a congressional bicameral Quad caucus. That's a very important development. And I hope that means future-proofing at least some parts of this legacy. So now the whole idea, of course, is about these GPGs benefiting the 4 partners, but also benefiting the region, as I've already explained. So now, and India's, I've also said, what are the benefits? Now let us just come to the change of governments. So we all 4 are democracies, so we are bound to see change of governments sometime or the other, and I've already mentioned why we need to also look at what will happen in the future. In Japan, I think Prime Minister Ishiba himself is a very strong advocate. He even talked about a Asian NATO. So he would be committed. And I already talked about what President Trump may think. But of course, there are issues now, given in Trump 2.0. There is this transactional make America great again kind of emphasis. Then I saw that Elon Musk has said something about cutting all aid. But burden sharing, I think EM has said I read some statements he made where he has said that in any case, there is enough burden sharing in the Indo-Pacific, in this Quad, so that shouldn't be a problem. But amongst the GPGs, some GPGs may suffer deprioritization. I'm being polite. Deprioritization. Which ones? Climate action, clean energy, even pandemic response, given the health and given the health secretary choice, also given a very gung-ho approach to, denying climate change, etc. So that is what is likely to happen. Lastly, we would need to ourselves very quickly build the constituencies or tap the constituencies in the capitals of these countries. Australia is already bought into this, but we will need to tap the constituencies in these countries, both on the basis of the China perception. Rubio could be a candidate for someone who can be supportive of this initiative, to have a holistic initiative, not just security-centered initiative, but to also have this GPG element. And also the second thing is to justify many of these GPGs, and actually one doesn't have to stretch one's imagination to do that, to justify some of these GPGs as having very clear security dimensions. So I think this is what we would need to do, and also greater clarity as to what each aspect of the GPG cooperation serves for these countries, what is in it for them, since that is the spirit in which things are going to be taken. So, but in any case, from India's perspective, this is something that has to be preserved, whatever we have achieved in the 20 years, but also taken forward, deepened, strengthened in many ways, also not only in the security area, but also in the GPG area. And there is one question that will also come up now in the future: how informal should it remain? How formal should it become? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that most inspiring address. May I now request Professor Amitabh Mattoo to give us his perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Professor Manish Dabhade, who has given a superb introduction to the theme. President Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, who really superbly and surveyed the whole area. And let me say that I express complete solidarity with her views on Bangladesh, and who has, frankly, in her remarkable tenure as the president of the India Habitat Center, transformed it. I've been a member of the Habitat Center from its genesis, and I have never seen the Habitat Center become such a vital center for intellectual pursuits. With all due respects to my friend Sunit, I think from being a fantastic source of great cuisine, now it has provided tremendous food for thought on a daily basis. So many congratulations, more power to you, ma'am. And Ambassador Lakshmi Puri has really made all our tasks very easy, because she has provided this substantive, comprehensive understanding of Quad, what it has done over these years. So I'm going to speak for the next 10 minutes, addressing 2 or 3 issues which I think are worth flagging, more in terms of endorsing some of the points already made, rather than providing any element of novelty. Let me say that the relevance of Quad became evident to me in the most stark way when I visited Taipei about last week. Only when you go into that island entity, let's call it that way, since we still believe in a one China policy. When I went there, a country of 23 million, one of the most densely populated small islands, but which has been subjected to what they refer to as, over the last year, the anaconda strategy, or the gray zone activities which are induced to make Taiwan collapse just short of war. Blockading, sanctions, cyber war, surveillance, and all the overwhelming Chinese power in all its dimensions, you become aware of the relevance of the Quad. More importantly, that this small island entity, it produces 90% of all the semiconductors in the world. They have, of course, signed agreements with Tatas in India as well to develop that. But that this one single country is now responsible for providing what is the backbone of all our current and emerging technologies. Taiwan's survival is important not for geopolitical reasons alone, it's important also for the critical technologies that it manufactures, but also important for the values it represents. Today, in one index, they quoted to me some of our interlocutors from Taiwan in the Asian ranking and the Southeast Asian ranking of democracies. Taiwan ranks second or third. Vibrant democratic culture in the most hostile region of the world, capable of the most producing and innovating in areas of frontier technology. It just shows the tremendous resilience of Taiwan and the people of Taiwan. And they're looking at India and the Quad as countries, as formations which can assist them. They're not dependent. They say we will fight on our own, come what may. We assist them to at least push back on clearly Chinese hegemonic designs. We are told, as students of international relations, that ideas often matter in the long term and interests matter in the medium and short term. That is the difference, classical binary between realism and liberal institutionalism in international politics. But if you look at how far we have moved, 20 years ago, or let's say 27 years ago, look at these countries. When India exploded its nuclear device, we had the most comprehensive sanctions against us from the United States. The Australians physically removed many of our officers who were attending the Higher Defence College in Canberra and declared them persona non grata. The Japanese reaction was also hostile. Despite the fact that India was still the most vibrant, biggest, largest democracy, despite the convergence of values that existed. But today, forget the ideas, forget the values, it's a convergence of both interests and values that matters. And interests matter primarily because of the one factor that Ambassador Lakshmi Puri signaled towards, Manish referred to, and Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee also talked about, which is the rise of China. If you look at the history of the 20 years of Quad and look at it through this just one variable, we're taught about how when you develop in research, you need to identify variables and then try and develop what is the strength of the correlationship between those two variables. If you look at Quad and you look at it through the variable of just China, 2004 to 2017, the first 13 years, the debate, whether it was in India or in Australia or anywhere else in the world, was, will China's rise be peaceful? And at that stage, I must say, whether it was in JNU or ANU, the debate was in favor of the Sinophiles, who said, oh, China will behave differently from great powers of the past. There is a Chinese way, it's built to a certain kind of metaphysical Confucianism. And China has never been an imperial power. At most, they want tributes. China will never be expansive, revisionist, hegemonic. And the others who believed in the supremacy of Western values say, oh, China has been socialized into believing the rule of law. And it's gradually been institutionalized into the multilateral system. So China will be a benign status quoist power. 2017 to 2024, I think that debate was settled. China is like any other great power, which means that it will, when it becomes hegemonic, when it acquires the power, will want to rewrite the rules to suit its interests like great powers in the past have done. Why should it accept an international order created by great powers which are declining today? Today, however, there's another fear of Chinese exceptionalism, that China is not just going to be a benign power, which we know is a debate that's been settled. It's not a benign power. That China is not just going to be like any other great power of the past, wanting to further its own interests. That China will be aggressively hegemonistic in a way that's even different from any great powers of the past. That there have been exceptional situations in Europe and in Asia where you had powers like China, and that China's designs today are far more aggressive than often we can even imagine, even today in terms of our policy making. And even in academics, it requires a flight of imagination. Where does Quad fit into this? Quad fits into this because it's the only response that we have at this time, which is at least systematic, even though it doesn't have a secretariat, even though people talk about how the merits of its flexibility is what matters. And despite the fact that it's evolved to a point that you have now presidential summits, and though Biden may have been sleepy Joe most of the time, but at least on this, he was bright and alert initially. But the great variable for the next year is really going to be two factors, both T. One, what happens in Taiwan. What happens in Taiwan, and if the world lets Taiwan go, will mean a repeat of a cliche of a domino theory, that Taiwan will signal to the rest of Southeast Asia that there's really no one to stand up for them. So it is better to capitulate or find some via media with Beijing. And the second, of course, is the great joker in the pack, who's we wake up now not on Twitter, but on Truth. Is that the social media platform used by President Trump? Yes. Truth Social. So what Truth Social or Trump will do, my instinctive view, because after all, the instinctive view with Trump works much better than the analytical view, because he works on instinct rather than on analysis often, is that he buys in to the idea of the quadrilateral, of the Quad. As long as he feels that the stakeholders themselves, the principal stakeholders, which is India, China, India, Australia, Japan, are willing to buy in, and for buy-in means spending more, giving more. Trump is not, and that is one consistency that is displayed, is not going to subsidize. And frankly, I think it's important for all the stakeholders here as well, Australia, Japan, and India, to not want that subsidy, to recognize and realize that the Chinese hegemony, to countering Chinese hegemony is in their national interest. And the only way that you can do that is by displaying what the Yiddish call it chutzpah, audacity. You require audacity, chutzpah. You require a certain leap of faith and imagination in terms of your policy making. And one question which I would like to ask the three distinguished ambassadors on this table, and Ambassador Mohan Kumar, who is a leading authority in multilateralism and has and understands many of the ways in which global governance is carried out. The one question that I have for all three of them is the Indian system capable of that chutzpah? We know that the Prime Minister Modi is capable of that chutzpah. But can the Indian system, in terms of its capacity, in terms of its imagination, really have an all-of-government approach which will recognize this looming threat, which is already more than just looming? In every sense, whether it's in economics or culture or in terms of the military threat. if you are able to answer that question in a yes, then I think we can go home and sleep well tonight. However, if you have any doubts, then I would suggest that you perhaps reflect a little more, meditate a little more, because that's the only way, Indian way of doing it, as someone referred to as Gopal Gordas, who said, Galti karna hamari, it's in our nature. Galti manna is a sign of our culture. But correcting that mistake is a sign of progress. So if we learn from our mistakes, it's important to then take the corrective measures. It is important to take those corrective measures right now. Thank you.
Can I just ask you to address one question? Do you think that from this, we should be going into a more fixed, formal security arrangement? Because you're talking about this threat.
Oh, I think it will, ma'am, in response to your answer, I think it will require a much more formal approach, but it will have to be in a manner in which it is customized or institutionalized, let us say, in a way to address as I said, this overwhelming threat. Because I don't think any precedent of the past prepares you to address the China challenge. So it requires an out-of-the-box new way of thinking, which requires a formalization of your security relationship, but requires much beyond that. Just to translate that English translation back into Hindi is, Galti karni prakriti hai, galti manna संस्कृति है और गलती से सीखना प्रगति है. तो हमें अपनी गलतियों से सीखना है और आगे बढ़ना है. शुक्रिया.
That was truly inspiring, Professor Mattoo. And since you asked us these questions, I can just respond by saying we need to go back into our past and remember what Krishna told Arjun when he was unwilling to fight. He said, whether you fight or you don't fight, the men facing you are going to be dead by the time the sun sets. And I also said in my presentation that the Bhagavad Gita tells us, prepare for war with peace in thy soul, for in that peace there is no sin. Therefore, I think if we go back into our past, we should tell ourselves, yes, we have that audacity. It's time to remember the past when we go into the future, because if we don't do that, we will be always left behind. So I would say that the time has come for that audacity, and that audacity, the faster it comes, the better it is for our core national interests. I now have the great pleasure of requesting Ambassador Mohan Kumar, who, despite the fact that he looks very, very young, is a very learned person, and he is going to tell us, give us a new perspective, and then we have a little time left for question and answers. Over to you, Mohan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ambassador Lakshmi Puri, who's also my first boss actually, in Geneva, so know each other for a long time now. Mr. Manish Dabhade, thank you very much for inviting me, and Professor Amitabh Mattoo, who has thrown the cat among the pigeons and asked us difficult questions, so I'll try and answer them as well. So on Quad, I won't take more than 10 minutes so that we have enough time for interaction, because a lot has been said and I think the most important things have been said. I'll be a little provocative because we need to have a discussion, and I'll also answer the chutzpah question posed by Professor Mattoo. So I think Quad has had a checkered career. The Chinese foreign minister, the current foreign minister, but in a previous avatar said it's going to dissipate like sea foam. So it's good to know that it hasn't dissipated like sea foam. I think this is something we should recognize, because there was a time when Australia dragged its feet, and then India dragged its feet out of deference for China, and then a lot of things happened. The Chinese mafia in every foreign ministry, I keep asking them, why do you think China did what they did in Ladakh? And the only explanation I have got is that, you guys went too close to the US. not realizing that which was cause, which was effect. It's arguable. Actually, I think we went close because they pushed us. Anyway, that's the only explanation you will get from the Chinese hands. So I don't think it has just survived. It's flourishing. 4 leading maritime democracies. It's important to recognize that. I also believe that the 3 of them are treaty allies. India is the only country which is not a treaty ally in the Quad. And therefore, from my perspective, at the risk of being a little immodest, without India, Quad doesn't make any sense, frankly. Because the other 3 can get together and do whatever they want. They've got collective defense. They can say an attack on one is an attack on the other. So Quad gets, I think, a particular identity only because of India, in my view. And in that sense, India is also the odd man out, because we don't have a treaty alliance. The agenda from being very limited, one of the good things about somebody calling you to speak is it leads you to do some due diligence. So you look at all the previous declarations of Quad, and therefore you learn a little bit as well. So the first declaration, 2021, is nothing much. There's nothing much there. But if you look at the subsequent declaration, I'm saying 2021 because that was the first time the leaders met. And that was not in person, actually. 2021, 2 meetings. One was virtual, and then September there was an in-person meeting. But beginning from the in-person meeting, the agenda has become very expansive, frankly. Nobody expected the Quad to have such an expansive agenda, and I'll be looking at some of that. Annual summit meetings are happening, and I also want to draw attention to the fact that the joint statements focusing on just respect for UNCLOS, and what Ambassador Lakshmi Puri so eloquently talked about, the global public good, those things we are now going hammer and tongs. Some of the statements I would like you to understand and appreciate that India by itself will not be able to make those kind of statements against China, because obviously China is the target. Who else is there, right? East China Sea, South China Sea, UNCLOS. It's very obvious you're talking about China. But we take comfort that we can do it as a Quad statement. I don't think India would be too comfortable doing it, and that's something worth keeping in mind. So that is as far as looking back is concerned. So the fact that it's flourishing, from my perspective, it's a spectacular success. If you start to think of how it began, very modestly, not knowing whether it was going to be this grouping or that, and really feeling its way around, I think it's come of age. No question about that. Looking ahead, my provocative thought for the evening is that we should completely shed this idea that this is a diplomatic grouping. This is, to my mind, a security grouping. However, this is not about traditional security. So it's not about guns, artillery, tanks, missiles, aircrafts, no. But non-traditional security. This is absolutely a security grouping. I don't think we should kid ourselves that China, will buy this when you say you're a diplomatic grouping. They don't give a damn. They know the grouping is aimed at them. So who are you trying to kid? And really, the non-traditional areas of security, I would like to list them, beginning with maritime security. And we call it maritime security in the declaration. So why are we shy of calling it a security grouping? You've got a maritime security issue, and we have an information fusion center in Gurgaon, which is following dark vessels, as they call it, in the Indian Ocean and thereabouts. And it's 24/7. So what we have been able to do is to detect illegal activities in the exclusive economic zones of Indo-Pacific countries so far. Looking at the future, I want to be able to prevent them. It's one thing to detect unlawful activities, but can you prevent them and tackle them? That's going to be the next step for Quad. And you have to find a way to do that if the Quad has to keep growing and making itself relevant. So that is maritime security. The next is health security. Again, health. It's a non-traditional area of security. Ambassador Lakshmi Puri is spot on. We've distributed close to 1 billion vaccines. That's hell of a lot, frankly. It's vaccine Maitri multiplied 10 times. It's fantastic what Quad has been able to do. Now, the question I have for the future, can we anticipate the next pandemic? I think the Quad should. We've got so many scholars, you've got so many STEM scholarships, you're talking of coordination among 4 important maritime democracies, which also have a lot of public health experts. Can you then anticipate the next pandemic and deal with it? So that is the Quad Health Security Partnership, and it is security as well. The third security aspect is cyber security. And cyber security is turning out to be a terrible problem, frankly. There are repeated attacks on hospitals. There are repeated attacks on schools. There are repeated attacks on telecom structures. And it's only a matter of time before India really, God forbid, faces a terrible cyber attack. And these are done by state actors, not just non-state actors, state actors. So what the Quad is currently doing is they are carrying out massive training for Indo-Pacific countries to guard against such cyber attacks. You provide training telling them that, listen, you can take these precautionary measures, detect attacks, deal with these things. But I would still say the policy response for the future will be, if you know that some attack is coming from a country, let's say China, just being provocative, and for example, then what do you do in response? Because the cyber attacks will only continue to grow because of deniability. You see, nobody is able to do anything. Chinese state will just say, hey, we don't know. These may be a bunch of guys, rogue guys sitting wherever. And Russia will say the same thing. Other countries will say the same thing. We have to find a way to pin this down and not allow deniability to become the norm. Otherwise, you will have cyber attacks really growing exponentially. So cyber security is my third security aspect. Next, climate and energy security. And this is a non-traditional area. I mean, who doesn't believe energy is really security? I'm looking at Ambassador Lakshmi Puri because we all know that the Minister Hardeep Puri has done such an amazing job to just achieve energy security for the country. Including buying oil from Russia, but also doing other things. So energy security is terribly important. Without it, what kind of economic growth can you really have in the country? So climate and energy security, and the reference has already been made to the HADR of India, which is very important, disaster relief. We have a National Disaster Management Authority, and this is an assistance that we are now making available for Indo-Pacific countries. Can we harmonize green policies, green shipping network, and clean hydrogen partnerships? I would be happy if the next Quad summit did not invent a new area and just focused on implementing. I think we have enough on the table. You don't have to come up with an extra area for cooperation. Just implement whatever.
Another aspect I would add, sorry to be
Please.
so informally,
Please.
laterally.
My first boss, ma'am, you can do anything.
But since you're talking about the extended security, I think this whole cooperation on critical supply chain, on rare earth minerals, that cooperation is very important.
I don't know
and
how
I love this whole aspect of putting them into the security basket.
I don't know how you read my mind, because I'm not joking, ma'am. You have to see this. That's my next point. No, what you say is absolutely correct. Critical energy, critical minerals, we all are part of the, the Quad investors network is important as well, because we are now making sure that we invest in critical. I will do 2 minutes. I know you're being a tough boss. You've always been tough, Tota. Okay, thank you. So I'll just spend 2 minutes more. Economic security. I've done climate, energy security, critical mineral security, now economic security and space security. Really, those are the two things I want to talk about for a couple of minutes. On economic security, infrastructure, Ambassador Lakshmi Puri talked at length. And I think when you say infrastructure, we are talking of undersea cables. We know what happened in Finland recently. This will happen in the Indo-Pacific. It's a matter of time. And I think this is also a security issue. On outer space and space security, I think we need rules of the road. If Quad can write rules of the road, this is an area which is really a jungle. Everybody is doing their own thing. So if you can write rules of the road, that will be great. And then 1 more minute, let me answer Professor Mattoo's question. I don't know if this answer will meet the approval of my illustrious seniors who are here and Manish ji and yourself. My view on chutzpah is that India will be able to do chutzpah only when it becomes a 10 trillion economy and we are able to lift these 500 million people who are les miserables. We get them out of poverty. You can then do chutzpah every day, day in and day out. Until then, you're going to be doing a lot of strategic discourse. And I'll conclude by saying it bothers me as a trade specialist that your strategic discourse is way ahead of your trade and economic discourse. And that bothers me. So I think we need to bridge that gap. And then your day will be made, Professor Mattoo. Fantastic. We'll all be doing chutzpah every day. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Mohan Kumar. My response to what you just said would be that what you say is correct, but maybe we can't afford to wait that long.
Yes.
What you are saying is true in an ideal world. But today, in the context of what's happening in the eastern part of India, we no longer have the luxury to wait that long. So that is why I said that I support Professor Mattoo when he said we need to prepare ourselves now what we should do to protect our territorial integrity and be prepared and do it well and do it to win. That's what we need for the moment. We will now take question and answers. We have time for only 3 questions because we've overrun the time. We're supposed to finish at 8. It's now 8:15. So is there any lady who wants to ask a question? There's a lady right here who wants to ask a question.
My name is Upasna, and thank you for the wonderful address. My question is, recently, India and China have been witnessing engagements, and especially after the BRICS summit. So, Ambassador Mohan Kumar had also raised the point that where do we locate the cause and effect, whether the summit diplomacy between India and China, how it went wrong. So I want to raise the same question to you. Please address it.
Okay, there's another lady here who wants to speak. Take the mic.
Okay.
Please identify yourself.
Yes, myself Divya. I'm a PhD scholar at Jawaharlal Nehru University. My question is a kind
Keep
of a
the
query.
mic closer to you. Yeah.
My question is a kind of a query. When you talk about the disaster management, there is a collaboration with National Institute of Disaster Management. Could you reflect more about it? Because what I have been witnessing while reading around disaster, the collaboration has been quite less or in a very poor stage. So reflect on that. Thank you very much.
Can you identify yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Pradeep Singh. I'm an ex-energy executive. I was based in France, and I'm still a member of the French think tank IFRI. And I do spend a lot of time.
You were raised
here.
in France, then you also have anti-American DNA or not?
I'll talk to you about that afterwards. Well, because of my French connection, of course, I do have some bias, and I believe that you, and of course, Mohan Kumar as well, you will have some empathy with what I'm about to say. One of the major countries which has extensive physical presence in terms of geography in the Pacific happens to be also France. But despite France wanting to become a part of Quad, for some reason there hasn't really been much of attraction. So that is something that you may like to address. And the second observation is, or a question that follows from it is, despite all that Quad has achieved so far in various aspects, the fact of the matter is that notwithstanding this, China continues to flex increasingly its muscles in South China Sea, whether it concerns Philippines, it concerns Vietnam, or it concerns Taiwan. And the apparent reluctance, at least demonstrated reluctance so far, to address China issue squarely, I think it is not taking us anywhere. Because unless we address this issue focused and in a concrete manner, the security issue has to be formalized and concretized.
Okay.
Otherwise, China will continue to be aggressive.
Thank you. There's
Thank you, ma'am. My question is for Professor Mattoo, since you
so
highlighted...
your name is Rahul, I'm told.
Rahul, yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. PhD candidate at Jawaharlal Nehru University.
Right.
My question is for Professor Mattoo, sir, since you highlighted this point about values and interests. I would also take a line of thought where there is this matter also about values versus interest. And why I'm saying this is because US has been following this policy of a grand strategy of democratic solidaritism, but at the same time we see that India has a conception about Indo-Pacific where it says open, free and inclusive, which means maybe Russia is welcome, even China to a certain extent, if it at all changes its behavior, whereas US has a differing or diverging approach on this. And also India comes up with this idea of a multipolar order approach, wherein there is only India as a democracy, but that there is a scope for China and Russia to come out more clearly on this stage. So how do you see this kind of divergence?
Okay, we give the mic to Tarun, who's sitting in front of you, I think. Tarun.
I'm Tarun. I'm a PhD scholar at Jawaharlal Nehru University. So I have a question to Professor Ambassador Mohan Kumar. So since you highlighted climate security as the fourth priority of Quad, but in climate finance, all the Quad countries, including India, particularly India, all the climate finance is basically government-led and public-led. The Quad countries are not helping the so-called global South in the climate finance. So what is your opinion about it and how to go about it?
I'm Dinesh Sharma. I'm a journalist. My question is about Taiwan. Although India does not have formal diplomatic relationship with Taiwan, I am curious to know what is Taiwan's stand on Sino-Indian border dispute? Because when Chiang Kai-shek was fighting for his life, ran away from China, still he refused to toe the Indian line on Sino-Indian dispute. What is Taiwan's, suppose tomorrow Taiwan declares independence, will it support India or will it support China?
Thank you. So, Mohan, you could just answer those which are within your area of
Absolutely,
competence, and then-
absolutely. Thank you. So, I don't know your name, but your question on Ladakh White. Anyway, I can only give you my view. I don't buy what China and some other experts say, which is that we became close to the US and border infrastructure, which we built at a frenetic pace. That has also been cited as a reason. I genuinely think it was a mistake by the Chinese leadership. I think there is some literature in China to suggest that they made a mistake. They expected us to just roll over and drop dead, if you know what I mean. But they did not expect the degree of resistance that our soldiers put up. So that's my theory. On Pradeep, your question, France wanting to be part of Quad, I don't think it was serious, but I leave it to people who are more qualified. On China flexing its muzzle, I have to be brutally honest. I think part of the problem is that expression which Quad keeps repeating like a mantra, the ASEAN centrality. It's ASEAN which is the problem. They want to have their cake and eat it too. You see, it's they who should be taking up the cudgels on behalf of Philippines and so on. India cannot be more, shall we say, holier than ASEAN. It is ASEAN which has to take care of this. But ASEAN, has its own view on that. And finally, on climate finance, since you asked the question, I think public-private partnership is the way out. We should not expect governments of the Quad to do much. But if Quad can actually help get funds from private sources, I think India can leverage it. India actually stands to benefit if we can be smart about creating an ecosystem where we can attract green finance and green technology. I'm still optimistic that India will get the funds. Thank you, Tota.
In fact, there's a very interesting talk which is being organized in Habitat a few days later, where Dr. Montague Singh Ahluwalia is going to be speaking on the same topic, public-private partnerships. I'd like to attend it. I'll just give the floor to Professor Mattoo.
Yeah, there's so many questions, Rahul. I think I'll address your question in JNU, but let me say one thing, which is also a response to Ambassador Mohan Kumar, by not as a way of criticizing, but critiquing his point of view. When China opened up, they had the strategy of what used to be described as the 24 character strategy of Deng Xiaoping. Hide yourself away from the sun, bide your time until your time comes, and then. So I think Ambassador Mohan Kumar suggests that we need to bide our time, build our capacities, and then display our audacity, our chutzpah. Unfortunately, and I agree with Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, we do not have the luxury of the Cold War, where China could navigate a space to bide its times, build on its strengths, and then become hegemonic as it has done today. We are faced with a much more turbulent world, whether it's in terms of competition or conflict, or even in terms of the scarcity of global commons and global resources. So we'll have to do it together. I don't think you can sequence it anymore. It's not in the old-fashioned way. It's not bread versus guns. It's both. We have to do our internal development even as we marshal our external resources, and often do it by piggybacking where necessary, by aligning where essential. So it's I just think that that's not a luxury which you can in today's day and age afford. On Taiwan, it's an important question, but if you're going to think that Taiwan will suddenly say, that we recognize the border, they've not really thought over these questions. They have inherited some of the policies and they're sticking to it. But the fact that they allow the Dalai Lama to come to Taiwan as well is indicative that these are tactical things. If you build a relationship, I'm sure you'll be able to resolve, if ever there was an issue where the Taiwanese were to become the center of the one China, then you could settle the border, I can assure you, with much greater ease than you can do so with Xi Jinping's China. So while I understand your sensitivity, I think it's more formal and legalistic than really reflective of any political realities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'll pass the floor to Ambassador Lakshmi Puri.
No, I would like to respond to the disaster management related question. Of course, I didn't get enough time to elaborate on it, but I think disaster management or humanitarian assistance and disaster relief is one of the areas that has been better developed in the Quad. And they have tried to build a capacity to give tangible benefits in this area, not only to themselves, but to the other countries in the area, which I've talked about, the Indian Ocean Rim Association countries, the Southeast Asian countries, and the Pacific Islands countries. And they have set out guidelines for Quad partnership on HADR. They have tested it in Papua New Guinea. They have tested it in Vietnam recently. And this involves coordination, investment, rapid response, long-term resiliency. And they have undertaken disaster preparedness exercises. So it is quite evolved. Though I was also surprised, as I told you, I hadn't imagined, it's not that visible, and I think that's one of the things that we need to do to make these things more visible and raise consciousness. I would like to also respond to this issue of finance for Global South in the context of the Quad. In all of these global public good partnerships, what has been happening is that there is some investment from governments that are being put, and they are not only for themselves. They are going to benefit the Global South. They are going to benefit everyone in some way or the other. So that is one. And then there are elements like in the secure supply chain and resilient supply chain. It has to be with the involvement of the investment by private sector, including on, say, rare earth and critical minerals, critical technologies, undersea cable. Everywhere, private sector has to come in, and that way I agree with Mohan that, but also to draw attention to the fact that there has been government investment. Whether that will continue, particularly on the part of the US, is the concern now.
Well, I'll just make a few comments and then ask Professor Dabhade to give his comments and conclude. Mike, I have just two small comments. One is the question which was raised about France and the Quad. Actually, the French were initially not very keen to be in a grouping that is led by United States. And since you've lived in France for many years like I have, you would know, for instance, how reluctant they were to join NATO when de Gaulle was there. Because the French have a very independent foreign policy. And even in this day and age, they frequently make statements which are not completely in conformity either with EU foreign policy and certainly not with their transatlantic partner. It is the United Kingdom, because of its old colonial baggage, that was very keen to be in the Quad. And it is the United Kingdom which rushed to join AUKUS. And that again is a very interesting play between UK and France, because France has much more presence in Indo-Pacific, as you pointed out, than United Kingdom, despite all its posturing. The other point I wanted to make was about Taiwan, and to say, being a student of modern Chinese history in Delhi University, and having studied this issue at length, there is a great difference in the Taiwan founded by Chiang Kai-shek, who was driven out of the mainland China by Mao, and today's Taiwan. Today's Taiwan regards itself as a strategic partner of India, and although we don't declare that Taiwan is and India have diplomatic relations as such, because we still officially abide by a one China policy, although China does not believe in a one India policy, because China does not recognize certain states in our northeast as an integral territorial part of India. They are shown as part of Chinese territory. But nevertheless, I would agree with Professor Mattoo that if by some quirk of fate you had Taiwan deciding on the border issue, we would do it much better. And it is also very important for all of us to remember that China, under the Communist Party, has settled all its most difficult border disputes with every country except India, including Vietnam, which brings us to the issue, why have they not done that with us? They have not done that with us because they want us to remain a sub-regional power trapped in our neighborhood, fighting to come out, but knowing that when there will be that fight on the border, we will be alone. We will not have an ally with us. And that is part of the great Chinese overall design. Not only is it an aggressive hegemonic power, but it wants to keep India trapped in its neighborhood. And our problem is, A, we don't have the time and the liberty to wait, as Ambassador Mohan Kumar said, till we achieve economic might. But secondly, we have never been a hegemonistic power. Right through history, we have not been a colonial power. So when we become a great power, then we would need to have a debate. Should we be a great power which is not hegemonistic or hegemonistic? Because the definition today of great power status is that also of hegemonistic power, which changes the rules to suit its core national interests. That is particularly true of ex-colonial powers, including China, who found the rules of the game set against them, so they want to change them. We have the same problem too. So that is a debate that will come in the future. Over to Professor Dabhade.
Thank you, ma'am. I think we all can surely agree that it has been a very high quality discussion, extremely comprehensive, illuminating, and I'm sure very provocative, as it should be. I really thank each of them, Ambassador Lakshmi Puri, Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, Professor Mattoo, and Ambassador Mohan Kumar, and all of you who are here today evening. Thank you so much. And in fact, as a teacher and as a student of India's diplomacy and grand strategy, I think the Quad is an excellent, grand geopolitical opportunity for India. And as everyone has have pointed out in various ways, that India needs to play its cards very smartly, very competently, and very timely. I think that is extremely important. So with this, we end here today, and thank you so much for joining us.